Hi there, I'm Rob. I will be discussing in this short video the psychological consequences of alienation and the suppression of independent thinking in society. In any vibrant and evolving society, the ability of individuals to think independently, question the world around them, and express themselves creatively is a vital psychological need. However, when individuals are alienated from this process, when they are discouraged, dismissed, or punished for questioning norms or thinking differently, the consequences are not merely intellectual, they are deeply emotional, psychological, and societal. First, let's talk about alienation from society. It can be likened to an invisible wall. Alienation does not always occur through force or rejection. More often, it takes place quietly through systemic discouragement of free thought, creativity, or critical reflection. When individuals sense that their ideas are not welcomed or valued, they begin to internalize a message: my voice doesn't matter. This emotional detachment evolves into alienation. Alienated individuals may still participate in society externally, going to work, interacting socially, but internally they feel excluded. The social connection becomes superficial. They become observers rather than contributors, feeling as though they are living in a system built for others, not for them. This sense of not belonging can diminish motivation, self-worth, and emotional investment in the collective future. Next, we will talk about blame shifting and self-disconnection. Sometimes it becomes a convenient psychological escape to shift blame and disconnect from oneself. One of the most common consequences of feeling powerless in society is the tendency to externalize responsibility. People begin to blame systems, institutions, and authority figures, sometimes justifiably. However, in many cases, this blame shifting becomes a defense mechanism. It protects the individual from having to reflect on their own role, their own choices, or their capacity for change. This creates a dual disconnection from the society they blame and from themselves. The more they project their frustrations outward, the less connected they feel internally to their own agency. Reflection and ownership diminish. Constructive action becomes rare, and passive dissatisfaction becomes a norm. This pattern further entrenches emotional and psychological distance. I'd like to focus next on the rise of self-interest and decline of collective purpose. When people feel that the larger system neither sees them nor supports them, they may withdraw emotionally from the idea of working towards a common goal. The result is an increase in self-interest, often not out of greed, but out of perceived necessity. If no one cares about me, why should I care about others? This mindset weakens the shared responsibilities that bind societies. Trust erodes, community efforts dissolve, and a culture of individualism begins to take root, not the healthy kind based on self-actualization, but the defensive kind built on emotional survival. The broader goals of social progress, empathy, and mutual growth become less important than personal security. This leads us into the next topic for discussion, that of apathy, cynicism, and the death of social imagination. Over time, individuals conditioned to believe that their ideas and efforts are meaningless often fall into apathy. When repeated attempts at thoughtful engagement or creative contribution are ignored or punished, hope fades. People stop imagining alternatives. They stop believing in change. They stop dreaming. This emotional deadening leads to cynicism, a bitter and distrustful view of the world and of others. Cynical individuals may dismiss all efforts at reform or progress as futile or manipulative. They become emotionally numb, intellectually disengaged, and psychologically worn down. This is not laziness, it is emotional self-preservation in a world that feels indifferent. Next, we'll look at the deep emotional toll of suppressing independent thinking and then begin to explore the individual psychological consequences in even greater detail. First, there is the distress and psychological conflict these people are dealing with. When people are prevented from expressing thoughts that feel natural or intuitive to them, internal conflict arises. They may experience chronic emotional distress, not from external hardships, but from the inner tension of being out of sync with their own cognitive identity. This can lead to persistent feelings of restlessness, irritability, and sadness. What worsens this condition is that the distress often has no clear outlet. There may be no space, social, professional, or cultural, where individuals feel safe to speak freely or think aloud. Over time, this leads to chronic stress and emotional fatigue. Next is the suspicion and cognitive dissonance caused by feeling the pressure of continually being suppressed from expressing one's own independent ideas. As individuals realize they cannot question or critique the world openly, a psychological shift occurs. They begin to suspect not only the systems around them, but also themselves. Doubt becomes a permanent companion. Is it me who's wrong? Or is it the world that refuses to hear me? This cognitive dissonance eats away at confidence, clarity, and emotional stability. They may begin to distrust authority, institutions, or even close relationships. Suspicion can spiral into paranoia or a deeply ingrained belief that society is inherently unjust or oppressive, even when that may not be entirely true in every instance. The next stages are feelings of hopelessness and helplessness to the extent of emotional paralysis. When an individual feels incapable of changing their environment or influencing society, they begin to lose hope. Hopelessness is not simply a lack of optimism, it is an emotional state where the future feels closed off. This often leads to helplessness, the belief that no action, no matter how sincere or persistent, will ever lead to improvement. Psychologically, this is devastating. Helplessness lowers motivation, leads to depressive symptoms, and erodes a person's sense of control over their life. It reduces resilience and increases susceptibility to mental health disorders. When a person feels hopeless, they tend towards hopeless behavior manifested as reduced effort and the shift towards survival mode. If questioning, innovating, or trying is consistently discouraged, people stop putting in effort. Why strive for excellence when only conformity is rewarded? Why think creatively when every new idea is met with resistance? Eventually, a shift occurs. People stop aiming for growth and start aiming for ease. They do the minimum to survive emotionally and socially. This is not a sign of laziness, it is a psychological coping strategy. By reducing expectations and disengaging, individuals protect themselves from further emotional harm. But over time, this harms society. It cultivates mediocrity. Progress stalls. The creative and intellectual richness of the community fades. What does all this mean then for the long-term impact on mental health and personality? Emotional distress, alienation, and helplessness, when prolonged, do not just cause discomfort. They alter personality. Individuals may develop avoidant behaviors, passive-aggressive tendencies, or even personality disorders rooted in insecurity and emotional invalidation. Conditions like generalized anxiety disorder, depression, borderline personality disorder, or narcissistic traits may emerge, not necessarily as inherent flaws, but as maladaptive coping responses to chronic suppression. The person may retreat emotionally, overcompensate with grandiosity, or spiral into self-loathing, all as a reaction to a world that doesn't listen. Increasingly, in the age of AI, anxiety, stress, and burnout are become all too common. The fear of being judged, excluded, or punished for one's thoughts is a constant stressor. It's not a single traumatic event. It's the slow, steady erosion of emotional comfort in expressing one's independence in thought. Over time, this leads to generalized anxiety, panic attacks, emotional exhaustion, social withdrawal, burnout. People actually may become emotionally numb, unable to enjoy life or feel connected to anything meaningful as a result. It appears that AI, in offering us the promise of hyperconvenience, could easily be seen as prompting us to the center of an all-consuming life of conformity, where AI actually does our so-called thinking on our behalf. A vicious cycle indeed, amplified disempowerment leading to societal breakdown. When individuals feel emotionally unsafe, psychologically invalidated, and intellectually dismissed, they disengage. That disengagement weakens society itself. Collective goals dissolve. The social contract phrase. What follows is not just individual despair, but collective stagnation. A society that suppresses independent thought, creativity, and emotional expression slowly destroys the very mechanisms that lead to innovation, solidarity, and growth. That brings us to the end of the discussion, and here we can begin to look at ways of reclaiming our independent thought and expression for societal health. In order to build a resilient, forward-moving society, we must restore spaces for independent thinking, reflective engagement, and creative exploration. People must feel emotionally safe and intellectually empowered to express themselves. Only then can individuals rediscover meaning, agency, and connection. And only then can society harness the full potential of its people, not just as laborers or followers, but as thinkers, dreamers, and contributors to a better world.